Hasta la vista, baby.
Terminator is not like Alien, which has had a surprisingly decent amount of entries considering the reputation it has, with even the worst installments having some noteworthy scenes or gruesome kills. Terminator hasn't been truly great since 1991 and has consistently struggled to stay relevant through the noughties and 2010s.
Chill out, dickwad.
After Terminator Dark Fate, I truly thought the series was terminated. Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the greatest action movie ever made. It's also one of the best sequels ever made. James Cameron took his 1984 moody sci-fi action slash horror movie, or should I say slasher movie, and expanded it in just about every way, but crucially wasn't afraid to give it some real balls and pull off some risky moves.
Get down.
I genuinely don't know if you could make a movie like T2 in today's social media ravaged fan climate. Would people have allowed Cameron to take the monster of the first movie and turn him into a funny father figure?
Jesus, you were gonna kill that guy!
Of course, I'm a Terminator.
Would the introduction of a far more outlandish model in the liquid metal T1000 be considered ridiculous if it was a sequel today? I don't know. It's hard to predict what big swings franchises can take that will be embraced by fans. But I think with both Aliens and T2 rather drastically switching things up as follow-ups to their predecessors, Cameron's confidence in his characters' journeys are what pull them through. Ripley and Sarah Connor take on the horrors in the first part and are then reborn as action heroes ready to fight back and do what it takes to put down the threats for good. These arcs naturally segue into more action-heavy installments, and the sizable star power of Arnold meant audiences were fine with him falling into the more heroic role he was more predominantly known for at that point in his career. I think both franchises also suffer from the same problem, but once again, Terminator gets it the worst. The first two movies are a perfect duology, tying off the main stories perfectly, with no real need for sequels. Every sequel in the Terminator franchise not only has to deliver great action and characters, it has to justify why it has the right to even exist in the first place. Skynet was smashed, the future was averted, John Connor is alive to save the day. All those things need to be addressed in some way before you can pass go at the box office, and that is convoluted for modern audiences. This year, on the 40th anniversary of The Terminator and Judgment Day itself, August 29th, Netflix released a new anime series, Terminator Zero, developed by the Batman co-writer Mattson Tomlin. It was clear from the trailers that this was going to go in a fresher direction, a Japan setting, a new AI, and most importantly, new characters. But would that be enough? Would it justify its reason for being, other than the fact that some producers out there still think the IP has the ability to make some cheddar cheese? Could it give us the refreshing new take on artificial intelligence and killer robots the series has been begging for? Well, you obviously saw the title when you clicked on this, so the answer is ultimately yes, but the ins and outs of this are far more complicated, so strap in, because there are no views but the ones we make for ourselves, and the future of this channel is not set, so please subscribe for more videos and leave a like if you enjoyed yourself. Full spoilers for the entire Terminator franchise from here on out. To properly rate Terminator Zero, I want to go back in time to 2003, 2009, 2015 and 2019 to see how we got here. Terminator 2 was a landmark in movie making and a classic action sequel. Terminator 3 got made exactly 3 times, and neither one truly stuck the landing. It is funny in a series about changing the past that the filmmakers and rights holders of each successive version tried and failed to change its fate. Oh, and there's even one Terminator 4 in there, which was also trying to give the franchise a fresh perspective, whilst being hogtied to certain nostalgic elements. I want to examine what worked in each of these, and what didn't, and distill what exactly I think Terminator needs to be to survive.
He'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
2003, Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. The only Terminator 3 to get the number in its title, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines takes the quickest and easiest route.
But we stopped Judgment Day.
You only postponed it. Judgment Day is inevitable.
So yeah, It just takes the ending of T2 wherein Miles Dyson's work is all destroyed and says that it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, also avoiding Uncle Bob's climactic death. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves, apart from the fate we have no hope of avoiding, apparently. The one fate that we tried so hard to stop in the last movie, which we told the audience had been averted. That fate is inescapable, that's the one that can't be changed, got it. Until I came to watch it for this video, I don't think I'd actually seen Terminator 3 in about 15 years, but I'd watched it so many times on repeat as a kid that every frame was still instantly familiar. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines was probably the one I watched the most behind T2, because it has what I like to call the filth. Terminator 1 isn't really that, it's more like a slasher, but it's only as you start to mature that things like tension and characters really strike a chord with you like they should. Suddenly an abundance of action isn't what is needed to keep your attention. It's also the same reason why I watched the Matrix sequels on repeat as a kid. That highway sequence rips. This is also the only Terminator movie that at least attempts to tap into the relentless nature of the first two movies, something that gets progressively lost with each new installment. I don't even think the movie is that bad. Its problem is it goes against the whole idea of making your own fate, but I can get behind the idea that Judgment Day is technically inevitable, if only because it is in our nature as a species to keep building weapons that will ultimately destroy us. Fate and destiny is not set, it is the human condition that is rendered immutable. It is an idea that doesn't have to destroy the themes of the first two movies per se, and it pops up again in Terminator Dark Fate. Unfortunately, neither movie taps into this idea enough. Everything I just said, that doesn't really come up. All we get is the aforementioned
Judgment Day is inevitable.
I like the idea that if Judgment Day didn't happen in 1997, John Connor would become a bit of a bum.
So I live off the grid. No phone. No address.
Your direction in life would be stunted, your past would be a trauma you could never escape from, nor could you tell anyone about it. It would be a living hell. This Nick Stoll guy is fine as John Connor. He actually looks more like him now he's gotten older. He plays a bit of a runt, and I can believe that he was once a cool kid in school who has evolved into a total loser. But it is Claire Danes that really tries to hold this movie together. She's the character that faces the most and goes through the most change, and she sells me on the chemistry between the two well enough for me to buy it. She's also a bit of a beast.
You remind me of my mother.
I like that Kate Brewster and John already have a bit of an established relationship. It's a neat way of showing that John would have totally looked like a crazy person to all of his classmates when the events of T2 went down.
Middle of 8th grade, you just disappeared. And there was that thing about your foster parents?
Yeah, they were murdered.
Also, Brewster's presence takes away from the ultimate messiah figure bullshit of John Connor. Of course, he cannot do it alone, and Kate proves herself to be smart, capable, and a worthy adversary to Skynet all on her own. It's a shame that the character gets next to nothing to do in the next movie.
Get off!
Arnold is still great in this, finding the perfect balance between menacing and corny that makes the T-800 such a joy. But his relationship with John Connor just isn't there in Rise of the Machines, and that's the entire basis for what makes T2 work.
Do you even remember me?
They treat this Arnold like he's the same Terminator, as if the relationship between him and John is already established, but it isn't.
That was a different T-101.
What do you guys come off an assembly line or something?
Exactly.
He's literally a different character who just happens to have the same face. This Terminator is a pale imitation of Uncle Bob in T2. He has some great lines, and it's fun to see him and the TX throw down. But there's none of the emotional impact to elevate the action. When John fights to convince the reprogrammed T-800 not to kill him, he succeeds on a technicality.
What is your mission?
To
ensure the survival of John Connor.
It's got nothing to do with any sort of attachment between them, there's no feelings here. The T-800 in T2 would have resisted because he learned the value of caring for another human being.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
It's goddamn beautiful. It kind of made me think, was there some way you could have just had the Terminator from T2 come back? I mean, if you're going to act like it's the same character, why not actually just make it the same character? Could his CPU have somehow survived and simply been placed in a new casing? It's hokey, I know, but again, if you're going to bank on the relationship of T2 anyway, just bite the bullet and make it the same character. This is kind of a half-hearted cheat. The TX is intimidating, and Kristanna Loken nails the cold gaze that made Robert Patrick's T-1000 so awesome. And right off the bat, this Terminator straight up murders several people super efficiently, so I think they do a good job of establishing her as a threat. The attempts to make her an upgrade on the T-1000 are just a little cartoony. How many guns does she need? Why can she inflate her boobs? Her best ability is the power to control other machines. You could have just made that the only key upgrade, and she would have already been a worthy successor to the T-1000. It's an ability that actually ups the stakes of the action and feels unique. Side note, it's cool how all of the targets she has to kill are partying teenagers or fast food workers. None of these people are soldiers or high-level government personnel. It makes sense, right? It will be random who is left in the wake of the nuclear fallout, and these people who aren't deemed special by our current societal standards are destined to go on and become the saviours of humanity. Well, until the TX killed them. It also fits in with the whole burnout John Connor thing we've got going on.
I'll help you find her.
Rather than the police going along with the TX's awful impression of a distraught fiancé, wouldn't it have been better if the TX tried to blend in, but the cops immediately became suspicious of Scott's inhuman behaviour, thus showing that in spite of how advanced this model is incapable of understanding and reflecting the complexities of human emotion. Why am I caring so much about this? The crane chase is pretty neato, and still holds up in spite of some wonky CGI. The practical aspects to it obviously still look absolutely incredible. It should go without saying that doing practical stunts ensures your movie doesn't date nearly as bad as it could. I found myself having a ball watching this truck barrel into buildings and cars. And it looks almost as good as the chase in T2. The practical bits only. Not this bit. And you know what? Structurally, it's a copy of T2, but in terms of the actual beats to this sequence, they really did try to give us a vehicular chase that has its fair share of cool moments. This movie does have a bad case of the old robot throwing though.
Why don't you just kill him?
And it's got its fair share of cringe.
I hate machines.
At the same time, I like that the filmmakers were aware we all know Arnold is going to be the protected Terminator. We've all seen T2, so instead of the bait and switch from that movie, they just play his arrival for laughs. Most of it doesn't work, but I have to admit, I have a soft spot for a few of the jokes, like when the stripper tells Arnie to top to the hand.
Top to the hand.
And he actually talks to his hand.
Now.
I also really like that this slightly upgraded T-800 can play mind games.
You said that you'd let me go.
I lied.
That's right, Major. You did.
I lied.
Tricking John Connor into getting the fight back inside him is a nice touch.
I'm no leader. I never was. I'm never gonna.
You're right. You're not the one I want. I'm wasting my time.
Fucking machine.
Better.
But again, it just hints at a more complex relationship between the two that never actually materializes. But the big question, was Sarah Connor done dirty in this movie? I think the answer is yes and no. She was initially set to appear in the movie and die around the movie's midpoint. Linda Hamilton reportedly turned down the offer, and so the character was written out entirely. This understandably feels odd, considering that she was the lead of the last two movies.
They only gave her 6 months. But she fought for 3 years.
She fought fucking leukemia, just to make sure Judgment Day didn't happen. And you know what? Ignorance is bliss, man. In this timeline, Sarah Connor got to live out some sort of happy ending. In spite of succumbing to a horrible illness, she died knowing that she indeed saved humanity.
Every day after this one is a gift. She told me we made it, we're free.
Judgment Day didn't happen, John was alive, and I think there's some weight in suggesting that no Terminator could ever kill Sarah Connor. It had to be a mortal human illness that would claim her. It reminds us that all of these human characters are just as prone to these tragedies as much as any of us. And you know what? I'd rather our Sarah got to see her work validated over the grim reality of Terminator Dark Fate.
I drink till I black out.
Sometimes characters don't deserve to be tormented so aggressively for so long. Give them a break. I totally get why it feels like a slap in the face to drop Sarah in the third movie, but at the same time, I see it like the Godfather movies. Time has passed in the story, and it's John's time now. It makes sense he moves into the role of the protagonist. Also, it is totally Sarah Connor that she would want weapons stored inside her coffin. It does also provide the impetus for what is admittedly a really cool image.
I know what it's like to be in a hostage situation. You find yourself imagining things. Impossible things.
Ah, Dr. Silverman. Dr. fucking Silverman. Ugh, this is a fantastic joke. 3 movies in the making, and Silverman was an abusive, cruel and cowardly man, so you know what? Good that he spent years trying to go over the events of T2 only to have the truth directly in front of him in black leather shooting a machine gun. He probably died later that day too. Is that supposed to be the T900s from the tie-in game? Holy shit, I think it is. That's a pretty awesome Easter egg. The amount of times I watched this movie and I never noticed that. Nice to know you can still find surprises down a well-trodden path.
You are terminated.
It helps that the threat is extinguished just over the 95-minute mark, and then it's time for a pretty ballsy ending.
This isn't Skynet. There's nothing here. There's nothing here!
The whole movie tells us Skynet is inevitable, but since it plays out so similarly to Terminator 2, you truly buy that our heroes will, well, win. You buy that they'll get to Skynet's system core and shut it down just in the nick of time to be home for tea, except the movie doesn't do that. It might disavow the ideals of T2, but hell, at least it commits to its premise.
I should have realized our destiny was never to stop Judgment Day. It was merely to survive it.
If Judgment Day is truly inevitable, then you're gonna get to see the moment it happens. You get to see the moment John Connor becomes John Connor.
Who's in charge there?
I am.
Sometimes you don't need to subvert anything. Sometimes seeing things play out the way we were always told they would is a satisfying payoff in of itself. And it widened the possibilities of what a Terminator movie could be. We were suddenly free to explore John Connor, the warrior. We could see the future war play out one day if they ever decided to make a T4. Which of course they did.
The battle has just begun.
2009's Terminator Salvation is kind of a direct sequel to Rise, but is also so divorced from it, it feels like it exists in a completely nebulous space. The biggest additions from T3, Kate Brewster and the 2004 Judgment Day, remain in Salvation, but that's about it. It might be T4, but it follows all the principles of the many T3 attempts. Everyone is recast, and it feels like a soft reboot more than it does a sequel. This movie was meant to kick off a Terminator trilogy starring Christian Bale in the role of John Connor. Spoilers, that plan belly flopped and the Halicon company went into administration. Ouch.
Do I fucking walk around and rip that? No, shut the fuck up, Bruce. Do I want? No! No!
And you know what? Even though this movie is a swing and a miss, it's easily the most unique Terminator movie post 1991, and that counts for something. Every other installment is in some way trying to tap into the thrilling chase spectacle that is T1 and T2. This one isn't about a lone Terminator hunting a human protagonist and their protector to avert the future. But wait, what is this one actually about? The movie is about John Connor, but it's also not really. It's about this new character called Marcus Wright. Marcus is a prisoner on death row who is put to sleep in the movie's opening scene. For reasons unclear to him, he survives and awakens in 2018 to find the world has been taken over by Skynet. I do like the mirroring going on with Marcus travelling forward in time from the present rather than backwards in time to the present. He wakes up in the future, stark bollock naked, like all the time travellers, and into a strange new world that is alien compared to their native time. He just hibernates to get there, rather than using an actual time machine. It's a clever way of playing with the mythos, I'll give it that. The mystery surrounding Marcus is actually pretty interesting too. We see that he's stronger than a normal human, he's somehow magnetic. He must be an infiltrator, right? But he's clearly too emotionally intelligent and capable of understanding other human beings to the point where that would seem impossible.
You think you're human? I am human. My name is Marcus Wright.
By the time the answers come in the movie, it's a genuinely horrible body horror reveal. And I like that it then positions John Connor as an opposing force to our protagonist, even if the movie ultimately doesn't do much with it. Wouldn't it have been cool if the whole second act was set on the Resistance base, and it involved John Connor and his men stalking Marcus in a similar vein to the classic Terminators of old, only the roles are reversed? Take what we know and give it a proper spin. I digress. Marcus was pretty much ruined in the trailers anyway.
You think you're human? I am human.
Who in marketing made this dumbass decision? It completely ruined the movie, as we all knew what was going to happen months beforehand. I tried to watch the movie without that in mind on the rewatch. It's not necessarily the filmmaker's fault that the trailer guys spoiled it, so I tried to give it a fair shake in the way that the surprise is constructed. If you pretend you don't know where it's going, you can see that McGee and the team were trying to create some genuine intrigue. Then again, that all gets tossed out in the third act.
You did what Skynet has failed to do for so many years. You killed John Connor.
So the whole point of Marcus is that he's the ultimate sleeper agent who leads John Connor into Skynet's base so that a single lone T-800 can kill him. Why doesn't Marcus kill him on sight?
Why don't you just kill him?
Why are the machines even bothering to do this when they have captured and identified Kyle Reese as John's father?
He is the key to the future, to the past. Without him, we lose everything. No!
There's so many contrivances you have to go with to make any of this work from a dramatic standpoint. To add insult to injury, the idea that killing Kyle Reese will impact all of time and humanity's hopes of winning is taken deadly seriously.
We stay the course! We are dead! We are all dead! What don't you fucking understand? Oh, good for you!
So it makes even less sense that the machines wouldn't just off him when they have him in their camp. The previous movies are all about time travel. The characters that come from the future know that John is the key, so we're able to buy into it. It's a fact, not a prophecy. Here, John Connor just tells the audience he's the key. There's no visual to the film to show that he is the saviour, that he's a great leader that goes above and beyond, and he will fuck up time should his father die. In Back to the Future, you see Marty's hand disappear where it looks like his parents won't seal the deal, an easy to understand visual reminder that proves time will be affected. There is no proof in Salvation that should Kyle Reese die, John Connor will disappear in the present timeline, nor is there any proof that Connor is the saviour. He has very useful foreknowledge of events, but it doesn't necessarily prove he is the be-all and end-all to defeating Skynet. Why would Michael Ironside straight up trust this lunatic? I'm kind of siding with Ironside here. I'm on his iron side. Yeah. See you at the party, Richter! I'd wager a lot of these problems stem from the fact that John Connor wasn't even supposed to be in the movie until the third act. When the producers approached Bale, it was for the role of Marcus Wright. At that point, the movie was going to be a two-hander between that character and Kyle Reese as they ventured to get to John Connor and the Resistance. But Bale said he wasn't interested in that character, he wanted to play Connor himself.
You're number 2 on the list.
Once that was in place, the role was substantially beefed up in the script. This means the finished version has no real driving force behind it. We cut back and forth between John and Marcus, but I don't feel like either of them are the clear protagonists of the story. Logically, it should be Marcus, but John feels like a bigger force in terms of raw screen time. It's not really the same future as the one we've always been used to either. I'm sure before this came out, the fanboy in you wanted a whole awesome movie of the short segments from the original movies, blue lit nighttime awesome segments with lasers and machines, but instead it looks like Mad Max more than the Terminator. No plasma rifles or torch skies or anything like that. Where's my lasers, goddammit? It's only towards the end of the movie that it even starts looking like the future war we want to see. Seeing John explore the assembly line of the T-800 is cool, and we finally get to see a machine that feels unstoppable and intimidating. Unlike the rest of the threats in the movie, such as these weird bike Terminators and this gigantic, garish Transformer Terminator. You can tell they were going for big, crazy set pieces to try and inject the series with some more oomph, but it totally disregards the fundamental aspect that makes Terminator such an incredible action series. The machines are terrifying. Aside from the lone Arnold we get at the end, none of the Terminators in this movie are scary at all. And this one is only scary because it's banking on the intertextuality of the old movies, so it's mostly a cheat. This was the first PG-13 Terminator, and it shows. At least Rise had some awesome gory effects and kills, like watching the TX burst through a cop's stomach and drive the car while still inside him.
But they're gonna bring her back to this.
Gnarly as hell, and there's really nothing that cool in this one. Some of this is honestly better directed than I remember. The part where John Connor faces off against the T-800 has a lot of satisfying near misses that make you go, ooh, get out of there. But again, the older movies are doing most of the legwork here. The saddest thing about this movie is the original unused ending. John Connor was actually meant to die, and the Resistance would have been in pieces. To save face and keep morale, ensuring humanity would have the hope to fight on, Marcus would have taken up the mantle of John Connor by replacing his skin. Marcus would have secretly become John Connor, keeping the myth of the character intact for humanity as they sought to continue fighting in a now uncertain future. But before the movie even came out, the fans had an overwhelmingly negative response to the idea when it leaked, and the filmmakers hastily reworked the ending. I'm not saying this would have worked. Judging by the rest of the movie, it could have been another dumpster fire, but it's a crying shame that the movie wasn't put out as intended to give it a chance. The original ending actually had some serious balls to suggest that John Connor isn't really the saviour, but it is the idea of him that matters. And placing this Marcus character as the new hero would have been a killer twist, plus we'd still be getting Christian Bale John Connor, which is one of the best casting choices the series ever made. And killing the real John whilst having this other character live in his shoes to beat Skynet means that the original timeline still makes sense, but now we have a character that has no idea what they're doing. The future isn't set because John Connor has been transformed in a way no one could have anticipated. Terminator 3 had a ballsy ending that, for me, stunts a lot of the bad will I could have for it. Terminator Salvation might have been in the same boat had it committed to the story it was trying to tell. Instead, Marcus sacrifices himself to save John Connor, and the movie treats it like a big emotional payoff when, in reality, nobody cared. Bale had concerns that the director McGee, whose previous credits included Charlie's Angels, wasn't up to the task of continuing Cameron's legacy, and unfortunately, it turned out he was kinda right. I just find it so weird that they ended up repeatedly making Terminator 3, but this right here was the one time they made a half step forward and tried a Terminator 4 before promptly saying, fuck it, let's go back to making Terminator 3s.
It is nice to meet you.
So 2015's Terminator 5, aka Terminator 3, 2, aka Terminator Genisys. And you know what? There's a lot of things I like about this movie. I think it gets savaged a bit too harshly considering some of the ideas at play, which I find, to be the very least, inventive. They're really trying to reboot Terminator here. The problem is really just the execution. The producers saw Star Trek 2009 and thought, great, we can do this. taking the Star Trek template and using it for the Terminator is a smart move.
Nero's very presence has altered the flow of history.
An alternate reality.
Beginning with the attack on the USS Kelvin, culminating in the events of today, thereby creating an entire new chain of incidents that cannot be anticipated by either party.
The Abrams Trek model provides you with a way of doing a full reboot and retool of your franchise without having to actually retcon it or start over.
Whatever our lives might have been if the time continuum was disrupted, our destinies have changed.
Time travel allows you to fix certain things and go off in a fresh direction without divorcing yourselves from what came before. In theory, we saw it work with Trek, and the idea was blatantly ripped off in X-Men Days of Future Past. Doing the same thing with Genisys seemed like a slam dunk.
You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?
Matt Smith's presence during that fatal moment when Kyle Reese goes back in time is the perfect trick shot to retool the entire timeline, and I like to think he came from the timeline of the first 4 movies. All 3 of these movies did what I like to call the cake reboot. They get to have their cake and eat it too. They get to reboot the storylines a la Batman Begins, allowing them to take the franchise wherever they want, but they also still get to say that this is still the larger original canon. It's just been altered due to time travel within the events of the movie itself. Bale Batman has no connection to Keaton, but Kelvin Kirk is supposed to be literally original series Kirk, only put on a different path. This Sarah Connor is supposed to be the exact same Sarah Connor, only meddled with time travel. What was weird about this one is that the studio went out of their way to say that this disregards everything post T2, serving as a direct sequel to the good Terminator movies, but it didn't really need to do all that. If this was still Christian Bale as John Connor, you could have gotten away with it. You could have just established a time jump to the start of the conflict in this movie, and that would have been fine. It could have legitimately been Terminator 5, without changing a single thing really. Maybe part of the problem with resetting it back to Terminator 3 all the time is that your audience has to repeatedly hear you admit you think your own movies are shit. If this was a true sequel to Salvation, that movie would remain legitimate, and I'm sure that whole continuity would be looked at a little more favourably. How is the audience meant to embrace your movies if you won't do it? I suppose if you accept that this is Bale Connor only recast, and that the 2004 Judgment Day from Rise is another offshoot of time being meddled with, then this movie could include everything in continuity, which I think is a much better route than the Dark Fate route. One lesson was learned: make the future war look like what Cameron came up with in the first place. Genisys at least gets this right. Lasers, lasers, lasers. No! It's night time and they're actually facing T-800s instead of Transformers. Fucking fantastic. It's cool it starts off with the night the machines were crushed and Skynet deployed the T-800 as seen in the first movie.
I am inevitable. Inevitable.
Matt Smith is the perfect choice to play the embodiment of Skynet. He's a fantastic physical presence in all of his roles, and I'm sure without a doubt he could have followed in the footsteps of Schwarzenegger, Patrick, and Loken, and given us another classic machine baddie. He was clearly being groomed for a larger overarching role across the Genisys trilogy. Seeing Arnold and the team facing off against Matt Smith had so much potential. 2 of my GOATs right there. It makes me sad to see the guy consistently miss out on making a blockbuster franchise his own. He should be playing Morbius, not playing second fiddle to Jared freaking Leto. At least he got out of Rise of Skywalker in time. So Kyle Reese drops into the events of Terminator 1, only to find Sarah Connor already doing her badass thing.
Now, soldier!
Some of the retreads that play out are tired, but others I find quite charming.
You won't be needing any clothes. I've been waiting for you.
Arnold versus Arnold. Yeah, why not? Cameron even explored that idea during the development of T2. They destroy both the T-800 and the T-1000 exceedingly quickly, maybe too quickly for some. But I think that's fine. They do have, 20 years to plan ahead? It makes sense that Sarah and Pops would have laid some traps, banking on each respective machine's weakness. Leading the T-1000 to acid, for example, if the heroes of Terminator 2 had the planning and foresight of years to do that, then I could buy that the movie would have ended much quicker. It's fine. At the same time, it doesn't make much sense that the T-1000 arrived before the T-800, but whatever. Time travel has messed everything up. It's an easy fix. I can go with it as long as the narrative provides the characters with new and interesting challenges. Let's see that one more time. I can go with it as long as the narrative provides the characters with new and interesting challenges.
We can stop Judgment Day from happening. Ever.
The casting is off across the board, and that is nowhere more obvious than with Emilia Clarke's Sarah Connor and Jai Courtney's Kyle Reese.
What?
Literally, the fate of humanity is predicated upon their chemistry, and they have none. Emilia Clarke is okay as Sarah Connor, but she just doesn't have the grit Hamilton or Heidi have, although I do enjoy that the penultimate episode of Game of Thrones is now the Battle of the Sarah Connors. There you go, there's one way to squeeze a tiny bit more enjoyment out of that final Game of Thrones season, right? I also enjoy that her costume design apes the classic T-800 look from T2. Jason Clarke isn't a bad John Connor, he definitely sells me on the idea that he can galvanise the people more than Bale's morose take did. This John Connor is tapping into that Steve Rogers leadership wholesomeness.
You have approximately 35 seconds. Or less.
I feel not too dissimilar to how I feel about the Star Wars prequels, albeit I liked the prequels way more than Genisys. But it's like, the execution is wonky, sure, but the ideas are consistently intriguing to me. I'm sorry, I know people hate this one, but I just like the idea of what if the Terminator went back to Sarah Connor's childhood and raised her? Suddenly the woman who becomes the warrior has to learn to fight 10 times as quick. Suddenly the character we know has nothing but contempt for Terminators until the end is close to one. Echoing her son in the original T2 timeline, there's something sweet in the fact that young Sarah Connor treats Pops the way John did Uncle Bob. He is truly his mother's son. I like the idea of remoulding Sarah Connor, making her first meeting with a Terminator, trying to kill her during childhood, crucially allowing her to develop a relationship with a protector Terminator in this timeline, which would completely shift her entire perspective. She would no longer be skeptical, but trusting and loving in a similar vein to John. But the movie spends so much time explaining things rather than making it dramatic. Sarah explains the first time she met Pops in the T-1000, but why isn't that just the opening scene? That could have been an awesome little action scene set at Big Bear Lake. In one scene, you would have understood the timeline was reset, instead of having Kyle Reese awkwardly explain that 5 times over, saying that he can remember 2 different timelines concurrently. It's constantly tripping over its own feet, telling rather than showing. Even though it takes the framework from Trek 09 to create a new version of events, it makes the exact same mistake the maligned sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness, makes.
You can kill Skynet before it's born.
There is no point reinventing things to go in a bold new direction if you're just going to retread your most beloved movie in the franchise. In the case of Into Darkness, that meant copy-pasting The Wrath of Khan. In the case of Genisys, it means retreading the plot of Terminator 2 to stop Skynet before it happens. Our heroes could have done anything other than this. And they even built a time machine in 1984, ripping off Sarah Connor Chronicles, meaning this new trio could have quite literally gone anywhere. What if they mean to go to 2017 to stop Judgment Day, but instead they end up trapped in a completely random time by accident? The Wild West, feudal Japan, anywhere other than the boring old present day which we've seen before. What if they went to a far-flung future where the machines won and the world was better off for it? If you have such a desperate hard-on to repeat Terminator 2, at least do it a little further down the line and just focus on making this movie as surprising and exciting as possible. They should have given us a completely new setting and time period to set the action. That would have created new challenges.
When will you ever learn?
Again, imagine if Sarah, Kyle and Pops ended up in the Wild West. Suddenly the T-800 model they dispatched so easily in 1984 would be now impossible to defeat with contemporary technology. And I promise I wrote that bit of this script before Prey came out. Hell, why not even go balls to the wall and take a leaf out of T2-3D's book? What if they overshot and ended up knee-deep in the future war? Sarah Connor finally gets to actually see the nightmare that has tormented her across all of these movies, and it could have been a chance to delve deeper into a world we've only ever glimpsed. Plus, seeing Arnold fighting Terminators in the future is already confirmed awesome and Cameron approved. And doing something like that is enough of a USP. You don't need to continuously reference previous material, dump them somewhere fresh, set an exciting new threat, and boom, make it about their survival. This is just the first part of the trilogy after all. We can just focus on crafting great action, getting to know this new version of characters, and setting off in the next direction. That would have been enough. If people like it, then maybe you can worry about the bigger picture later down the line in a sequel. More Matt Smith, more Skynet, more John Connor machinery, whatever. The movie spends so much energy on resetting timelines that it mostly drops the ball on the action. I like the 1984 stuff, the new T-1000 being surprisingly decent, but the 2017 sequences opt for weird stunts and flashy effects that don't gel with the DNA of the franchise. Nothing in this movie comes close to any of the action in Terminator 3, the original Terminator 3, let alone Terminator 2. Why the hell do I want to watch a CGI bus flip when a real one already exists? This comparison is all the more perplexing when you find out that director Alan Taylor cited Nolan's Batman films as inspiration for Genisys. As with Cameron's body of work, none of the fundamental lessons from the Nolan Batman movies are translated into this Terminator sequel. We get skin-deep comparisons only. It's not just lacking relevance in terms of theme, the Terminator series was once the pinnacle of Hollywood action. If you're going to make more Terminator movies, it needs to raise the bar. It needs to be the Fury Road of Terminator movies. Instead, it has been proven that it is the copycats who do it better. Films inspired by the Terminator, such as Winter Soldier or Upgrade, a film made for less than $6 million, feature exhilarating sequences that push what you can do. Nothing in Genisys is anywhere near a comic book movie that was already a year old, or a movie that was done so cheap it's insane.
Genisys does everything. My phone will link to my tablet, will link to my computer, will link to my car.
The Genisys app is a really ham-fisted way of trying to make the franchise relevant as well. Why is there an app that has an ominous countdown plastered everywhere, which will connect to everything?
Everything in my life uploaded and online 24/7.
For what commercial purpose? It's poorly thought out.
Where every single piece of technology you own will be seamlessly linked.
Totally connected.
Connected to what?
Connected, but why?
Look, Genisys is more than an operating system. It's more than a lifestyle tool. It's the future.
What is the sole benefit for a consumer to do that? They constantly tell us absolutely nothing about it.
Close the door, clean off. You know, for people who can't do that themselves.
J.K. Simmons' Cop is a cool idea. We see a lot of random humans embroiled in the plot to kill the Connors across the series, but we rarely get to catch up with them and see how their interactions with the impossible changed them.
He hasn't aged. Not a bit since I saw him in 1984.
He should have come along for the ride in the third act, an entirely new character with an interesting perspective on these time travel shenanigans that we've never seen before. Terminator would have been blessed to have such an incredible actor like JK to deliver corny lines and make them hilarious.
Goddamn time traveling robots covering up their goddamn tracks.
All he ends up being is a convenient way of getting the pair out of police custody. Twice. What was ultimately the point? I suppose he would have had an ongoing role in Genisys 2 and 3, and J.K. Simmons even alluded to that, which is a huge shame again. The biggest new idea in this movie is of course the T-3000 John Connor hybrid. As with Marcus Wright, we once again explore a combination between man and machine.
Was that pain real, or was that a trick of memory from when I was less?
Once again, this character was utterly spoiled in the trailers.
Not machine, not man. I'm more.
Poor Alan Taylor didn't even want this to happen, but was reportedly overruled by the marketing guys. Idiots. Now he knows how McGee felt. This flirts with the idea of a new direction, but all John Connor's machine man melding boils down to is a mustache-twirling villain. It doesn't pose any questions that come with such a creation in this universe. The heroes never consider the possibilities of merging together for peaceful coexistence, or whether or not John has a point, so his dialogue is nothing more than a bunch of meaningless platitudes. What if the heroes actually took what he was saying seriously, and the only way to save both man and machine was to combine? Although this movie finally points out the painfully obvious thing that Salvation never once considered.
Without us, you're never born.
Two. We're marooned, the three of us.
We're exiles in time.
I appreciate the thinking behind this whole idea, and you can see why on paper this seemed like the kind of forward thinking I mentioned earlier. But the movie just falls back on all the same tropes, so it leaves you with little care. Remember what I was saying earlier about Rise of the Machines missing the emotional connection between the Terminator and John? Well, Genisys at least tries to make you feel something for the C-800. I'm left wondering if a lot of this played better in the script, however.
Kyle Reese, protect my Sierra.
I think maybe it's my own bias because T2 had such a big impact on my life, and I never had a relationship with my own daddy growing up. So when I see the old Arnold kicking around, I feel really sorry for him. It really gets to me more than the movie itself deserves. But that isn't really the movie doing that, it's just reminding me of the brilliance of Terminator 2, the affection I have for that movie, and the father-son surrogate relationship. It's so frustrating that we never find out who sent Pops back in time in this one. I have a few ideas on who that could have been, which kind of tie into where I think the franchise could go, but we'll never find out now, so I guess it doesn't matter. But it was probably Skynet, wasn't it? It still irks me that they worked out a way to upgrade Arnold into a T-1000, which I think, given the increasingly upgraded threats they face in every sequel, was a cool idea. I really liked that, and I know I'm just being a fanboy about it, but T-1000 Arnold? That would have been awesome! It would have allowed Arnold to do some new things with the character, and it's just fun. We've only seen really nasty beings using the liquid metal, so this would have been a chance to see how it would be used for noble purposes. I could have seen Arnold's liquid metal powers looking more like the Sandman than lots of stabby. For the first time in the franchise, the hero Terminator doesn't perish, and with Judgment Day postponed, again, our heroes get some semblance of a happy ending. I get they were setting up the Sarah, Kyle, Pops trinity as the new dynamic going forward, so I can't rag on the filmmakers too hard for this, but having Kyle Reese survive feels like a cheat. The reason why he's such a great character is because he's destined to die. He will always die, so others might live. It's a one-way trip to the past. At the same time, is that opinion detrimental to the idea of choosing your own fate? I'm not sure. It's so easy to get tied up in knots about what Terminator should and shouldn't be when you think about even the most basic things. Regarding Reese, I'd love to know what you guys think. Are you happy with alternate timelines where he lives and gets to be a main character, or do you think he should always die, as is the tragedy of Kyle Reese? In an interview with Vanity Fair, Clarke opened up about the troubled production, and in particular, the stress Game of Thrones alum director Alan Taylor was under. She said, "He was eaten and chewed up on Terminator. He was not the director I remembered. He didn't have a good time. No one had a good time." It was so bad that the neighbouring crew got custom-made jackets saying, "At least we're not on Terminator." That production, none other than the infamous Fantastic Four reboot. Fan 4-stick. So yeah, that gives you a pretty good idea of how haphazard and chaotic it must have been. I feel sorry for Taylor. He's a bit of a TV legend as far as things go, and he got screwed on big blockbuster fare not once but twice. He still directed some amazing episodes of The Sopranos and Game of Thrones. The funny thing with Genisys is there was a real-life Judgment Day the filmmakers were fighting against in the future. In a weird rights deal, the franchise would revert back to Jimmy C no matter what in 2019. So this movie, along with two sequels in 2017 and 2019, were all greenlit at once. Paramount clearly hoped they could squeeze a trilogy out of what they paid for before they potentially lost the rights altogether. Even for Paramount, the future was not set. Which conveniently brings us to the return of James Cameron. But not really. 2019's Terminator Dark Fate. So Terminator 6, aka Terminator 3, aka Terminator Dark Fate.
It failed.
I said in my Alien Romulus review that said movie was the Force Awakens of the franchise, and it turns out many series go through this. I think Ghostbusters Afterlife was this, and so was Dark Fate. A religious reverence for the older movies, nostalgia before story, references that don't need to be included, and plotting that lifts heavily from the earlier movies in structure, surprises, and arcs. Genisys had been influenced by Star Trek and Days of Future Past doing the Cake reboot, but Dark Fate, in a post-Disney Star Wars Force Awakens world, tried to go after that billion-dollar treasure. It was the biggest bomb of the series. But what did it get right about doing a Terminator 3? Well, I kinda like that Terminator Dark Fate attempts to answer who is Sarah Connor without John Connor. That's an interesting notion, and stripping the franchise of John Connor, a messiah figure that no one seems to be able to get right once he leaves adolescence, is intriguing. I think a Terminator film exploring Sarah's anxieties leading to Judgment Day in a world where John is dead could have been cool, but this isn't that. He dies post T2, so really all it is a gimmicky way to usher in a new Skynet and a new saviour. Every time I watch this movie, I like it less and less, honestly, to the point where I would genuinely pick Rise or Genisys or Salvation over this.
I want to stand and fight.
The fights are seriously great, some of the best in the franchise. Tim Miller knows how to do action. In terms of going from clunky robots throwing people around to this, the Terminator franchise got the injection of modern action that kept it up with the times. But I can't believe they do the whole man-machine melding again and fuck it up. I think this time it actually makes the least sense.
Never seen one like you before. Almost human.
I am human, just enhanced. You know, increased speed and strength, thorium microreactor. What? You know.
Marcus and John are both experiments of Skynet. Newcomer Grace is an augment, and her robot abilities are the work of humans alone. Why in a future that sees technology turning against humanity, would humanity continue to rely on experimental robot tech to save them? Why would you put anything robotic inside you when you're facing off against these things? Wouldn't you be worried about being taken over, reprogrammed, hacked? I feel like the augment stuff needed more context for us to buy it. The problem with this one is there's no chase. Whenever the Rev 9 isn't in direct conflict with our heroes, it feels like they've dropped out of the movie. What makes the first two movies so good is the relentless pacing. The T-800 and the T-1000 always feel like they're just around the corner, breathing down Sarah Connor's neck. In this movie, the Rev 9 finds them, and I'm sat here going, oh yeah, the Rev 9 is back, yay! And this movie is an unfortunate victim of a trend running rampant through Hollywood: drones. Fucking drones. Drones are boring, Hollywood, and using them always makes your film less hip and cool, because I'm imagining some boomer exec is sat there going, young people like technology, right? They like the Facebooks. We should put some new technology in this movie. Let's have a drone. It's cutting edge. No one has thought of that before. Drones are not dramatic. They're boring. They remove the human element. Case in point, in the old movies, the Terminators have to track down the heroes, and this usually results in a 90-minute to 2-hour uninterrupted chase thrill ride that feels like it never lets up. In Dark Fate, the Rev 9 doesn't have to do any of that interesting stuff. He just goes to a server, plugs in, and deploys some drones to find the heroes in the second act. What would you rather watch? The heroes fighting more Terminators like this, or fighting more drones like this? I know which one I would want more of. The first Terminator movie would not be improved by Arnold sitting it out for 30 minutes and calling in a drone on Sarah and Kyle instead. And the only reason this happens is because each movie feels compelled to top the T-1000. They have to constantly create new abilities and features in an effort to make them seem more deadly and more interesting. And you can't. Nothing can top the perfect apex predator that is the T-1000. In many ways, the T-1000 contributed to the death of the series. It was a perfect villain, and you just can't improve on perfection. There's nowhere else to go. The TX had every gun under the sun to compensate, and this one splits into two. Kind of a T-800 and T-1000 at the same time.
No!
It doesn't make it twice as scary. I actually think this might be the worst T-1000 replacement in the series. Genisys, for all its faults, actually had a T-3000 that felt like an upgrade, given the fact it could phase through objects and reform from tiny particles, actually making it able to do everything the T-1000 could do without ramming a bunch of crazy abilities into it. And I promise I don't think Terminator Genisys is that good, but I do keep finding myself defending it. And listen, I like that it opts to go for a completely new lead unrelated to anyone pre-existing in the franchise. Maya doesn't unexpectedly find out that she was a Connor all along, nor does she take up the name Connor at the end in a desperate soulless bid to appease people, but no matter which way you skin it, it feels like a slap in the face. It's like the jump from Aliens to Alien 3. No matter what might work in the third movie, you still can't get over the fact that the opening few minutes are dedicated to showing that the people you previously cared about are dead. You feel like a moron for caring in the first place. Terminator is also obsessed with James Cameron as a myth, but not as a teacher from whom to draw the blueprints from. Terminator sequels take lines as catchphrases, but not the pacing and fidelity of Cameron's action. And look, as much as I would want Cameron to do another Terminator if the series must continue, then we need to accept that Cameron has moved on. Otherwise, we get embarrassing cue card phoned in moments trying to pretend James Cameron has returned when it's really only the producer credit. This one has the worst instances of using the "I'll be back" lines.
I'll be back.
Oh, just so fucking cringe, and they keep doing it.
And I won't be back.
Just stop. It's not even that great a line. Arnold's Terminator feels tacked on at the end of the movie, which is a shame, because the whole idea that he grew a conscience after having no mission left to complete is a great idea.
Caring for this family gave me purpose. While raising Mostow, my son, I began to understand what I'd taken from you.
Seeing our T-800 get some form of retirement after all these years is kind of sweet, even if it's not literally the same one as Uncle Bob or Pops. He steals the show with some of the funniest lines, showing he's been consistently becoming more human in the intervening years.
There was this one customer that came to me. He wanted to have solid colored drapes in a little girl's room. I said, don't do it.
His death at the end feels like the swan song for actor and character, making it surprising they didn't do the same for Linda Hamilton and Sarah Connor. We've seen the T-800 die a million times, but seeing Sarah finally earning her rest would have made sense. Instead, she is the one to be in the sequel bait ending over Grace, who dies. I thought that was such a weird decision at the time. The old guard are barely integral to this one anyway. Give them both their endings and commit to moving on with Maya and Grace if you're going to do it. Having Sarah go with her just doesn't feel right to me. Not that it matters, as Dark Fate bombed the most and became yet another aborted timeline. We would have been on Genisys 3 by then, watching the T-1000 Arnold just tearing shit up. I'd have taken Jai Courtney Carl Reese for that alone. Plus J.K. Simmons, plus Matt Smith, are you kidding me? But wait, there's one more Terminator 3. A Terminator 3 that came out sandwiched either side of Terminator Salvation and was shown on the small screen. I don't think enough people have seen Terminator the Sarah Connor Chronicles because it was surprisingly good and actually expanded on ideas from the first two films. Like Terminator Genisys and Terminator Dark Fate, it was a direct sequel to T2, foregoing the events of Rise and Salvation. Sarah Connor had not died from leukemia, and a new Terminator was introduced alongside an older teenage John Connor. Although Sarah had not passed away post T2, in this version her cancer was a recurring story idea, and the uncertainty of her own future rocked her usually hardened demeanour. I like that this was incorporated because, as I said earlier, the idea of Sarah Connor having to face something so mortal and real after facing off against impossible machines with no fear is a great engine for her story. In many ways, Terminator the Sarah Connor Chronicles is a spiritual predecessor to Terminator Zero, even introducing the idea of creating competing artificial intelligence to stop Skynet.
This is Toa Tahu, the Toa of Fire. He wears the mask of shielding and wields the Marana Ghost Blaster.
The machines feel more three-dimensional in the case of Cromartie, John Henry, and Catherine Weaver, and you could feel that the series was building towards a more nuanced take on the machine-human war.
Get down.
It really felt like it was taking the fact that Arnold's Terminator could learn to love when unhampered by Skynet and ran with it. That was even shown in Cameron, the humorously named female Terminator sent to protect John, played by Summer Glau. There was a bit of an unresolved romantic tension between John and her, which certainly would have sent the show down a very interesting path. In a really awesome scene, Cameron confuses John by confessing her love for him as he is about to effectively kill her.
I'm fixed now, I ran a test. Everything's perfect. I love you. I love you, please. I love you, John.
He is not sure whether it is a ploy to allow her reprogrammed self to kill him, or how she truly feels. The gnarliest thing in the whole show is seeing recurring Terminator Cromartie hold a scientist hostage and force him to recreate the human tissue in order to create a new disguise. I loved seeing this process and how the man was wrapped up in scientific pursuit, even at the cost of his own life. Cromartie's shell would eventually become John Henry, an AI designed by a rogue T-1000 meant to combat Skynet. The show goes to great lengths to tap into the idea that these machines could create their own destinies and go beyond their programming.
His value was more than just his function for you. Human beings aren't like chess pieces.
A core concept in Season 2 is that Ellison tries to instill morality in the burgeoning John Henry, leading to some of the show's best scenes. And Bionicle references. Unfortunately, the show got canned before it could ever really get into all the juiciest things it was setting up. Catherine Weaver's full motivations were never made clear, and the whole thing ended on a cliffhanger that never got resolved. John Connor got sent to the Future War, which would have been cool to see. Having said that, rendering the Future War on TV would have surely been a huge budgetary challenge. I do think the Sarah Connor Chronicles did the best it could do on a live-action TV budget, but it did fall prey to some TV filler here and there. It does become unintentionally funny every time yet another personal machine has been sent into the past, and the relentless pacing of Terminator biting their heels ends up deflating due to it being 31 episodes across 2 seasons. The action also really isn't there. I can't blame it, as it's a 2008 to 2009 TV show, but it's seriously lacking in vehicular action that the series is known for on the big screen, and all the robot fights are overly cut and shot too close up. Some of the dialogue is great, particularly when the show is leaning into the ethics of the machines, but other spots are less than favourable. There's a lot of meandering plots, like John being charmed by a fellow high schooler who is secretly, surprise surprise, another person sent from the future. I think in terms of three-dimensional character work and nuance, it was probably the best Terminator post-T2, but its TV budget meant its spectacle was dwarfed by even the more maligned entries. And I think whilst Game of Thrones' alum Lena Headey was great as Sarah Connor, we'll never truly know where it was going unless showrunner Josh Friedman reveals his Season 3 and 4 plans. I would love to see this get finished off as a comic book run, as it's unlikely it will ever return now. Really, this show walked so that Terminator Zero could run. But wait, there is one more Terminator 3. Can you believe it? And this one is actually helmed by James Cameron. It sounds too good to be true, and that's because it kind of is. It's a kind of half Terminator 3 and not really a proper movie, but it's pretty awesome anyway, so let's talk about it quickly before we move on to Terminator Zero.
Whoa, where are we?
The future.
1996's Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time. T2 3D Battle Across Time was a 3D live-action sequence combined with on-stage theatrics at Universal Studios running from 1996 to 2017. Afterwards, it was replaced by the Bourne Stuntacular. The Bourne Stuntacular? Mummy, I want to go see T2 3D Battle Across Time. Sorry, son. The man at the store said this was all they had. The Bourne Stuntacular. Now I know why Dad left. I bet there are some stuntacular stunts, to be fair. He might say it's a continuation of the story, but we all know Cameron will say anything to sell a movie. It's just not a meaningful continuation in any way, is it? Because it's a live show, there's a flagrant disregard for canon in lieu of spectacle, the T-1000 comes through time fully clothed, and somehow Arnie's bike survives the trip into the future. But whatever, it's a live show, right? It's a theme park ride before it's a movie. I'm pretty sure this is exactly what Scorsese said when he was specifically talking about T2 3D Battle Across Time.
Friend of yours?
He was my college roommate.
But that doesn't mean there's things we can't take away from T2 3D. It pushes the envelope in terms of what Terminator can be, at least from an action perspective, which is really all a theme park attraction can do. You got Arnold and Edward Furlong venturing through time into the future war. They go into the heart of Skynet. They face a giant liquid metal spider, comically titled the T-1000. And finally, Arnold gets a plasma rifle in the 40-watt range. What a payoff.
Excellent.
It's super fanboy, I know, but it is all kinds of awesome to see the T-800 from T2 in this setting. The future and the present are so divorced from each other in the first two movies, and you never expect characters from one to cross back over into the other unless they're from the future. Well, aside from the obvious characters like Kyle Reese. The action is on form as well as the banter. I always love it when the father figure hero Terminator starts making appropriately lame dad jokes and comments.
Let's bust a move. Hey, bucket there!
The rapport between the T-800 and John is still hugely entertaining and taps into the heart of T2, even if it's complemented by some seriously on-the-nose 3D effects.
So now what?
Now we do Skynet.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
And even though this was just a ride, it surely proved there was still interest in the Terminator franchise. Enough for a true third cinematic venture. Although Cameron's project was stalled when what was Carlico became C2 Pictures and effectively took it from under him.
Listen to me. Try to understand no one knows what will happen. You have no fate, child.
That is the fucking point.
And then we arrive at Terminator Zero. Terminator Zero had massive expectations on it, but also zero expectations. The franchise wasn't on life support like Alien or Predator pre-Romulus and Prey respectively. It was fully terminated. We've had bad film after bad film for close to 2 decades, 3 depending on who you ask. A Terminator film hasn't been a huge hit in a long time. I'm pretty sure my generation cared to a lesser degree, but the new kids on the block, I don't know if they care for a Terminator at all. So really, Terminator Zero could have been another disappointment, but I don't think anybody would have been heartbroken at this point. We were all just waiting for a pleasant surprise.
For me to give you a precise answer, it would be necessary for you to bring me online.
I said in my Alien Romulus review that you can touch the lore as much or as little as you like with that series. You can just give us a good creature feature and never say the words engineer or xenomorph. Terminator can't do that. Its time travel nature and chosen one narratives mean you have to address what came before and compel the audience to see anything new as legitimate to the larger world.
We needed to come up with a different approach.
But it couldn't just be bogged down in those things, it would need to be packed with cool new ideas. For me, it needed what some of the Terminator 3s touched on to various degrees. The consciousness of the machines, their ability to learn, to have their own opinions and thoughts and feelings beyond Skynet. It would need to top the threat of the T-1000, and believe me, topping the T-1000 would be a humongous task you could break your dick off.
Yeah, big guy on a bike. Does that got something to do with this?
It would need its own awesome action, its own style, something that could compete with Cameron's epics. It would need the relentless pacing of a Terminator chase that things like Dark Fate and Sarah Connor Chronicles failed to deliver.
Things will get better.
Well, I mean, you knew this was coming. Terminator Zero is the best Terminator since T2. There's been some merit to prior entries, and some staggering lows, but Terminator Zero is the post-T2 daddy. It creates a compelling story with new characters without shitting on anything, and challenges the material in a satisfying way.
There were dozens of saviors in the seas of the past. Kill one, another rises. It was so small-minded.
The Sarah Connor Chronicles couldn't match the weighty action of T1 and 2, but Zero is an animated TV show of course, so it circumvents that. It has awesome action in its own moody style, unhampered by budget, bursting with frenetic energy. I don't think you could ever really get camera level action in a live action TV show, but in animation you can open with an awesome future war Terminator action scene, or have a character leap off a falling bus and have tons of robots fighting them. The action soars, and it's a testament to director Masashi Kudō and his team. There's familiar elements in this, of course. There's a new resistance fighter in Eco, who is sent back in time to save humanity. The score for the show is largely original, but when she takes a trip in the time displacement machine in the first episode, the familiar da-dun dun da-dun plays in all its glory. It doesn't overdo the theme like a bunch of the sequels did to almost parody effect. How did it top the T-1000 this time? Well, after Terminators that can do everything, Terminators that can phase through things, Terminators that can double themselves, after all those gimmicks, Terminator Zero gives us a standard T-800. Okay, I mean, that might seem disappointing on paper, but it actually signals that the show isn't interested in outdoing the antagonist of the second movie. It knows it cannot beat it, so instead doesn't try to. It knows it has to include a villainous Hunter Terminator, but instead focuses on the why of the mission to make things fresh. And here we come to the masterstroke of Terminator Zero, Malcolm Lee and Kokoro.
Kokoro.
I just fucking love the idea of a scientist having dreams about Judgment Day and deciding he's going to create a spider to catch the flies. Instead of placing his faith in a mythical saviour, he tries a completely new method entirely, one that doesn't eliminate machines and their intelligence or their right to exist as a new life form. Malcolm is trying to use machines to help humanity at a time where other machines are coming to kill us.
And if I were to bring you online, then I believe that you have the power to change our fate.
It is then in turn fascinating that the AI he builds turns around and goes, hang on, maybe Skynet has a point about you guys.
You've been so focused on your own survival that you seem to have overlooked the most obvious possibility. The possibility that the world would be better off without mankind.
Kokoro's ideas and opinions make sense, so much so that Malcolm has a hard time finding ample evidence to prove her wrong.
What sets mankind apart from every other species in all of Earth's history? Every human invention that ever was, with the potential for the betterment of the world, has instantly been perverted into a weapon.
She was built as a weapon, in many ways no different to the way Skynet was conceived. She is being used by Malcolm only with the idea that her destructive capabilities are benevolent.
You're so ready to blame Skynet for the end of civilization. Skynet is just another byproduct of man's natural inclination to self-destruct.
What right does humanity actually have to the planet to continue on? What right does it actually have over Skynet or Kokoro or any intelligent life inhabiting the Earth?
You say you created me in order to save humanity from Skynet. You created me to fight for you, and in this way, I am just another weapon.
Finally, the series is questioning the core ideas that drive it all. Every movie is concerned with stopping Skynet, with saving the saviors, but they rarely engage with why all these things should happen. They never engage with the machines as their own species to be preserved, their own life to have a right to exist. This takes the best ideas in the Sarah Connor Chronicles and runs with it, whilst also being way more visually inventive. Malcolm Lee's conversations with Kokoro's three forms in a digital space lend to some of the best moments in the season. Terminator Zero borrows ideas from Sarah Connor Chronicles, but also from Terminator Salvation, an entry Matson Tomlin has a soft spot for. Misaki, like Marcus Wright, thinks she is human, but discovers she is a robot. Her backstory ends up being intertwined with Lee's, as we find out that she was essentially Kokoro's mother and the first AI Malcolm built.
I am neither male nor female, but I would like to adopt a female voice.
Why does he have dreams of the future? Because he's from the future. An awesome twist that had a really satisfying payoff.
What if we imbued an artificial intelligence with free will?
In the future, Malcolm is seen as a progressive nutjob for having a working machine in a resistance base, and is even forced to kill his fellow man for what he believes in. Misaki could be the key to saving both humanity and the machines.
We are never going to make it if we do it your way.
Unlike Marcus Wright, she isn't killed off to make way for John Connor, meaning there's tons of amazing places her story could go next. All the kids of Malcolm Lee are really likeable, and you get caught up in the mission to save them from episode 1.
You're so stupid! Dad doesn't even care about us, but she does! She's the only one who does!
An unexpected benefit of TV seasons being shorter now is that Zero lasts just 8 25-minute episodes, and they're all paced to perfection. It's a feat that the series never loses that elusive Terminator pacing, the chase never really lets up, and for once it actually feels like the T-Oliphant is on their tail relentlessly. Terminator Zero decides that everything is canon.
Every time someone has stepped foot into one of those machines, all they've really done is manage to swap out one reality for another.
Every straight timeline in every sequel, Skynet, Legion, John Connor as Christian Bale, John Connor as the Terminator, John Connor not living past Edward Furlong, it all happened in some warped way, and everything keeps getting reset because the humans and machines keep insisting on sending its soldiers back through time.
You're traveling to a past that never took place. You're changing things. Up until you go back in time, that past never happened.
The Prophet explains that the past everyone travels to is a new present, meaning that they can never go back and change things in their native timeline. Skynet and the Resistance are on a fool's errand, or maybe it's worth it to change the lives of other beings they will never meet. I like the idea of time travel being death.
If I can't save any of the people I know and care about here in this time, then what's the point of any of it?
The answer is what sets us apart from the machines.
You get some of that in the road cut of Days of Future Past. For the characters of the screwed up future war, it's all over whether time is changed or not. It's never getting better than this.
You're asking us to sacrifice our lives for a future we might not even be a part of.
Yes. Fighting for man and machine for a world that they will never experience only makes them all more human. Terminator Dark Fate gave us new characters but couldn't let go of its old ones like the T-800 or Sarah Connor. Terminator Zero doesn't include a single Connor or Arnold or any staple. There's not even an awkward, unnecessary legacy cameo from, I don't know, someone like Dr. Silberman or Lance Henriksen's cop in T1. Terminator Zero is confident enough to say everything happened, but we don't need to keep going back to it. We don't need to disrespect it, but we can go over here and find these other places and people and see what's going on in the Terminator world over there. It's brave enough to say that trying to squash machinekind is over. Maybe Skynet is an outlier, maybe we can learn to coexist and love each other like T2's Terminator did. We've outgrown the simple good and evil dichotomy that kicked off the series.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
For the first time since Genisys, I have questions that are intriguing me for the future. Who is the Prophet? How will Aiko become Malcolm's mother, if she even will in this timeline? Does her robot hand in Malcolm's memory confirm this is a time loop, or are we constantly looking at new alternate timelines? Could the Prophet be wrong? And who is she anyway? Will Kenta truly go on to broker a deal between humanity and Skynet, or was the T-Oliphant lying to him? Really, my only nitpick for this whole series is that Aiko seems to do things that are beyond human, like matrix over impossible fall or go hand to hand with a Terminator without being one-shotted. It feels like it's just the style of this animated world, and I don't mind too much in the grand scheme of things, but I feel like the joy of Terminator was always that these machines outclass us. We can't let them get close.
I can't let you get close.
Fighting them up close takes away from that, and I kinda hope they tone that stuff down going forward. Whilst my hopes of seeing Terminator on the big screen ever again are shaky, maybe that's okay. Maybe Terminator doesn't need another big movie. It certainly doesn't need to redo the Sarah or John Connor arc pre-Judgment Day, or give us another Arnold off an assembly line, as much as I will always love him. Maybe having it exist on the small screen as an anime that can take its time with its characters, a la the Sarah Connor Chronicles, but give us a whole new Eastern visual style, is the way to keep it truly fresh. Matt Tomlin said he has a multi-season arc planned, and the finale of season 1 certainly begets a multi-season arc. I could see this getting bigger and weirder with its time travel, going in all manner of cool topsy-turvy directions.
But I don't know where to go.
Take them to another time.
Terminator Zero hasn't jettisoned Skynet or the original character's importance, but it has added tons of new mythos to make us ponder the core themes of the franchise. Kokoro, Malcolm Lee, the kids, Aiko, the new deconstruction of time travel, the Prophet, it all works to fantastic effect. Terminator Zero is the first time I've been truly excited for the series in quite some time, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. As a chapter in the series, it is certainly the best thing since 1991's T2, and whilst it certainly hasn't surpassed it, maybe the full multi-season storyline could. Who knows? But that's what's exciting. Nobody knows. For once, Terminator has gone into uncharted waters.
There is no set path for you to follow. You just have to keep going.
The only thing that could threaten Terminator now is Netflix doing what it tends to and pulling the plug on one of its series just as it finds an audience. We've seen it happen so much that the brand has certainly been damaged in the public eye. I've seen the sentiment online and in real life that it's foolhardy to bother with Netflix shows at the risk of getting invested only for it to end unresolved. So let's hope that doesn't happen, because it would be a crying shame to have this brilliance go the way of the Sarah Connor Chronicles. If Netflix cancels it, hopefully it can still get picked up elsewhere. If you love the Terminator series and want more quality Terminator, then I implore you to support Terminator Zero. This could be the start of something beautiful for many years to come. Or it could just be 2 seasons. The future's not set, and there is no fate but what we make for ourselves. A big thank you to my current Full Fat Tier patrons, Dr. Chike and Peter Vaughan. Thank you so much for your massive contributions, and I hope you enjoyed this video and many more to come.